For this episode, I want to go a little farther afield, leave politics behind for a moment, and take a look at something that lies outside the current political order. One of the hallmarks of our current system, the worldwide system of technicity that we looked at in the first episode on Martin Heidegger, is that its conception of transcendence is focused almost entirely on a freedom from, meaning a freedom from boundaries, an escaping of all bonds, whether those are bonds of nature or of history. There's a sense in our system that that is the highest freedom, to no longer be bound by death, by race, by gender, by sexuality, by anything. To no longer be bound. That is freedom. But I think it's noteworthy that this conception of freedom, there's never any conception of what happens after that. What's next? How does one live in this kind of world? There's no sense of what's created after. And it's the problem, you could say, of the Matrix films, where the audience is thrilled to follow the hero in the first film as he realizes the constructed nature of reality and gains power over that. And once he has that power, the films really have nothing to offer in terms of what happens next. And in fact, when they came around to do a fourth film many years later, they had to go back to the initial gimmick of the first film and put the hero back in a box for him or whoever else to break out of that box. But again, there was nothing to do outside the box. In more practical terms, it's easy to organize people to tear down a statue. It's hard to get people together to produce a new statue of lasting value. And in fact, what people do put up in these circumstances is more like a trophy that the ancient Greeks would erect after a battle to mark a victory than it is a piece of public art. So in this episode, I want to take a look at a different view of the transcendent experience, the experience of escape, one that is not rooted in a modernist or technicity-based view of breaking all boundaries, something that's a little different. So to get this view, I want to look at a moment as it's presented in Shakespeare. We'll take a look at a transcendent moment Shakespeare creates in three different plays, three different contexts: a tragedy, a comedy, and a romance. What you'll see when you look at the way Shakespeare constructs a transcendent moment is something much different from a sense of escaping all boundaries, of leaving nature behind, if you will. And the way he constructs the moments in each play is he funnels the dramatic action towards these moments. And a key action takes place. Something happens on stage. A lot is said also, but there's some event that is shown and the event stands out from what's around it. The first moment comes in the final act of King Lear. So if you're not familiar with King Lear, through the course of this play, the main character, Lear, is the King of England. He's an old man, and through his own fault, essentially, he puts himself into a situation where he loses everything through the course of the play. He loses his throne, his daughters, his mind, at one point even his clothes. He's running around naked in a storm at night. And after a night on a barren heath in the storm, he is brought to the camp of a French army, which has invaded, led in part by Lear's youngest daughter, Cordelia, with whom much of the drama begins, the beginning of the play. Lear seems to recover something of his faculties. Now, early on, Lear had constructed a moment in the first scene where his daughters would put on a kind of rhetorical display of their love for him. And the first two daughters, the eldest daughters, they perform their role. And the youngest daughter, the one who's actually his favorite, Lear, I think, says, "What can you say to receive a third more opulent than your sisters?" Which seems to indicate that she might be his favorite. She doesn't play along with this. She has a hard time with what is essentially a public lie, like just a rhetorical display. She doesn't go along with the public lie. Lear gets offended at this, angry. He rejects her gives her nothing, splits up the third part of the kingdom that he was going to give to her. He splits that with the other two daughters. And now she returns. The other two daughters, their rhetorical display just hid a secret venom. They really hated their father or didn't care for him very much at all, and resented his attempt to hold on to power in his old age. And so, Cordelia returns, the head of an army, and there's a meeting and reconciliation between them where Lear says, "I'm a very foolish, fond old man, fourscore and upward, not an hour more nor less. And to deal plainly, I fear I am not in my perfect mind." And then he admits, I don't know how I got here. I don't know how I'm wearing these clothes. And don't laugh at me, but I think this might be Cordelia. She says, I am. And then he says, "If you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause. They have not." And then Cordelia says, "No cause, no cause." Although, in fact, she does have cause. I mean, he does spurn her, treats her very badly at the beginning of the play. She does have cause to not love him, but she still loves him anyway. They have this reconciliation. A battle takes place, but Cordelia and Lear are defeated and taken prisoner. And Lear seems content to endure prison as his fate. He says, "Come, let's away to prison. We two alone will sing like birds in the cage. When thou dost ask me blessing, I'll kneel down and ask of thee forgiveness. So we'll live and pray and sing and tell old tales, and laugh at gilded butterflies, and hear poor rogues talk of court news. And we'll talk with them too, who loses and who wins, who's in, who's out, and take upon us the mystery of things, as if we were God's spies. And we'll wear out in a walled prison packs and sects of great ones, that ebb and flow by the moon." So he wants to sort of be beyond this flow of politics and political games, to be just like birds in a cage. But he's too important a person for that to really be his fate. And they're taken away. One of the villains of the piece, Edmund, who's the bastard son of the Duke of Gloucester, he's taken advantage of the situation in flux to rise inordinately high for one of his station. And when Lear and Cordelia are taken away, he arranges for a desperate captain to go kill them in the prison. Now, later events don't prevent him from doing this, but all of that is set in motion. So everything is directing us towards this final appearance of Lear on the stage. In the first scene, rejects his daughter, and then he comes back and reconciles with his daughter, but we know that, to some degree reconciles, but we know that it's an unstable reconciliation because the political situation is in flux. And in fact, part of that flux, Edmund arranges for them to be killed. It doesn't quite work out. It only works out that Cordelia is killed. And then there's a stage direction that says King Lear enters, quote, "with Cordelia dead in his arms," which is quite a task for the actor who plays Lear to manage. That's a person of about 100 pounds or more. That's a lot to just carry on stage in your arms. And Lear comes in with her. "Howl, howl, howl, howl. You are men of stones. Had I your tongues and eyes, I'd use them so that heaven's vault should crack. She's gone forever. I know when one is dead and when one lives. She's dead as earth. Lend me a looking glass, that her breath will mist or stain the stone. Aye, then she lives." So there's some uncertainty on his part about whether she's alive or dead. And one interesting thing about this is that Lear is going to die, and it's not much past this where he dies on stage. And Shakespeare has so arranged the play that his death is the only one that we see on stage. Many people die in this play. Cordelia, Edmund, Lear's other daughters, Goneril and Regan, the Duke of Gloucester. Oh, the fool, Lear's fool, dies. All these people die, but all of their deaths happen off stage. It's reported. Cordelia, we see her body. That's a little different, but we don't see her death. We see Lear's death. And take a look at the context in which it happens. Lear's final lines. "And my poor fool is hanged. No life. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life, and thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more. Never, 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 never. Pray you undo this button. Thank you, sir. Do you see this? Look on her. Look, her lips. Look there. Look there. And then it just says he dies. Shakespeare has arranged it so that every other death happens off stage. Lear dies, and just before he dies, he's telling us repeatedly, look, 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 look there. And of course, we would be looking at him, directing us to do that. Not unlike when you point to a dog to look at something. They look at you. Humans will sort of do this too. We're not going to look at Cordelia because, we know she's dead. We're looking at Lear. And I think part of what is happening in this moment, what takes us out of ourselves in this moment, is partly we don't know why he dies. There is no immediate cause of death. He isn't injured in any way. Now, you could obviously have some practical reason. Oh, he has a heart attack. The emotions of it become so much for him that he can't take it, and he dies. He's already revealed that he's 80 years old. So, okay, here's the thing. For the actor playing this, it's an enormous moment. The entire play can be ruined if you play it improperly. So if you're Lear and you're playing it as an actor and you just sort of clunk over dead suddenly, that's going to have a comical effect that will spoil everything. But if you do it in a dramatic fashion and sell it to the audience, that will confirm the tragedy and make the play work. So it's a moment, the whole play hinges on this moment. That's part of why it's such a transcendent moment, because everything hinges on it, everything funnels towards it. And then as an actor, you have to sell to some degree, well, why is he dying here? What does his dying mean to some degree? And I think one thing that's interesting about it is he dies, and yet there's also an odd sense in which he dies in hope. There's some doubt, apparently, that maybe she's alive. And you have to remember that King Lear is set in a pre-Christian world. It's a pagan world. I think part of what's happening in the play, part of what the transcendence of the play, the transcendent moment the play offers is, it's the transcendence of a boundary, of a limit, that limit being death. There's an awful mystery to death that one must come to grips with to understand the human situation. And this play invites us to do that. Something that provides a limit to something also provides a means whereby you may understand that thing. So in the case of death, provides a limit to nature, a limit by means of which we can understand what nature is and what it means. It similarly provides a limit to human desire. Death is impervious to our desires. That's the thing that Lear is confronting in this scene where he asks, why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life and thou none at all? Why should these small things of nature have life and you don't? Because your desiring has nothing to do with it. This is a mystery that the Greeks understood by the fact that alone of all the gods, the god of the underworld, Hades, had no temples. The limitation that death provides, that we're invited to see here, provides us a means of understanding nature, a means of understanding our desires, but also by making Lear die in hope, Shakespeare also allows us to have in mind, or allows his audience to have in mind, that the Christian worldview, if you live in a world of Christian revelation, there is the promise of resurrection that might alter how one perceives death, and we're invited to consider that as well. This is a transcendent moment that is clearly different from one that is offered by the modern view. It is a transcendent moment centered on a hard limit, that hard limit being death, the mystery of death being something that this is a beginning point of wisdom, not necessarily for Lear, but for us as the audience seeing Lear's story. Now, our next moment occurs in a comedy, in Measure for Measure. The setup of this play is that it's set in Vienna. It's a setting of modern times, and the fundamental situation is the imperfect world that we have to live in. It is a degenerate world. It's morally and sexually degenerate in Vienna. And as a way to try to restore that, the Duke Vincentio, tries to use a Machiavellian trick to bring about a kind of restoration of order. And his trick is he leaves and appoints someone in his place named Angelo, knowing that this Angelo is so severe that he will apply the old laws and restore order to a chaotic and degenerate situation. And then perhaps the Duke will come back in later and he will reap the rewards of a restored order, but not the penalties of being hated for enforcing these laws. And the reason why I call that Machiavellian is in Machiavelli's The Prince, he reports on a man who used exactly this tactic, where a princeling of a city appointed some other man to do the dirty deeds, and then the man who did the dirty deeds was found in the town square butchered one day. And Machiavelli says, and everybody was satisfied because the man who did the evils wasn't the prince and was killed in a spectacular and theatrical way. He seems to cite this as a good technique to use to let somebody else do your dirty work, basically. But it doesn't work out because Angelo is corrupt himself, and and what he does is he condemns a man to death, Claudio, who did break the law, but the way Claudio broke the law was there was a woman he was engaged to be married. They'd already exchanged their vows, but they hadn't done the official wedding yet because there were, some financial considerations. They wanted a dowry. They had to wait for that. And so because they were already closely engaged, they had sex anyway, and she became pregnant. Now, that's technically a sin. But even in the eyes of the church, that's not you could atone for that. But it is technically sex outside of marriage, and therefore the old laws of the city are he has to be put to death for that. Now that's a very strict law, and Angelo enforces the law. Claudia will be condemned to death for this. And everybody in the play, everybody who isn't Angelo, basically recognizes that's kind of extreme. This is kind of an extreme measure. But Angelo is still within his rights. Well, Claudio's sister, Isabella, who is she's about to enter a convent. She's about to become a nun. She comes in to speak on his behalf. And Angelo falls in love with her. And he makes this dirty deal where I'll allow Claudio to live if you have sex with me. And she doesn't want to do it, but the Duke, who's in disguise, steps in. He's like, wait, I've got an idea. There's a woman who Angelo had agreed to marry, but then he spurned her because her dowry fell apart. Why don't you tell Angelo you'll agree to do it, but then we'll replace your part in his bed with this woman, Mariana, who's been wronged by him. And he will think it's you, because we'll do it at night. He'll think it's you, and he'll pardon Claudio. And Isabella agrees to do that. And the swap happens. Mariana has sex with him instead of Isabella. And Angelo doesn't know. But then Angelo is such a scumbag that he condemns Claudio to death anyway. And unbeknownst to Isabella, she doesn't know about this. The Duke goes around and he has Claudio saved anyway. And then he reveals himself in public, and Isabella denounces Angelo. She says, hey, I made this arrangement and I slept with him and he condemned my brother anyway. He's a bad man. This happened. And Angelo denies everything. He's like, oh, no, she's, none of this happened. She has no proof. And, I'm an important official. The Duke says, okay, well, all right, you're right, and it's looking bad for Isabella. And then Mariana appears, and then she says, "I'm the one who slept with him." Angelo denies this, and then the Duke leaves, comes back in his disguise. He was disguised as a friar. The friar's like, "Yes, I can confirm everything. I saw everything." And he's like, "Oh yeah, we remember this friar." But then they take his friar's hood off, and it's revealed to be the Duke. Everybody suddenly realizes, he was disguised as a friar all along. Angelo knows that he knows most of what happened. And but still, everybody thinks that Claudio was killed, and the Duke still doesn't reveal that Claudio was killed, and he condemns Angelo to death. And he says, "The very mercy of the law cries out, most audible, even from his proper tongue, and Angelo for Claudio, death for death. Haste still pays haste, and leisure answers leisure. Like doth quit like, and measure still for measure. Then, Angelo, thy faults thus manifested, which though thou wouldst deny, denies thee vantage. We do condemn thee to the very block where Claudio stooped to death, and with like haste. Away with him." The demand of justice, the demand of nature, of most human sentiment is eye for an eye, measure for measure. What you gave, you will receive. Most human beings understand that. That's what we naturally want. We sort of naturally want that kind of eye for an eye. So you condemn Claudio to death, you should die too. And then a very remarkable thing happens. Mariana begs for Angelo's pardon. She actually loves him. She's the one who took Isabella's place, and she did so because she still loves Angelo. They were engaged to be married, and even though he spurned her, even though she knows he's a scumbag, and even though she was spurned by him, she's still in love with him. And so she begs him to pardon Angelo, and she asks Isabella to join. And the Duke has a wonderful line where he says, "Against all sense you do importune her," meaning you beg her, you ask this of her, against all sense. "Should she kneel down in mercy of this fact, her brother's ghost his paved bed would break and take her hence in horror." He's essentially saying if she were to kneel down and ask for mercy, that would be a supernatural act. And then the next line is, Isabella says, "Most bounteous sir," kneeling, stage direction, kneeling. Now, any actress knows that this moment is absolutely a moment to milk. This is when, not unlike Lear's death, this is the moment in which all eyes are on this actress. What will she do? And most actresses milk it. They hesitate. It's just a profound moment because the logic of the stage, everything is funneled towards this moment. She believes that Angelo is a scumbag, that he condemned her brother to death unfairly. Her brother is dead. This is what she believes. It's, in the words of the Duke, it would be supernatural for her to forgive him. It would also be Christian for her to ask for forgiveness, and she does do so. Remarkable. It's set up in the play to be a remarkable moment. This asking for forgiveness beyond eye for an eye, a morality beyond measure still for measure, that is our transcendent moment here. And she says, "Look, if it please you, on this man condemned as if my brother lived." And then she grudgingly says, "I partly think a due sincerity governed his deeds till he did look on me." That is, he fell in love with me. Before that, he meant well. And since it is so, let him not die. My brother had but justice in that he did the thing for which he died. Meaning, it was against the law what her brother did. For Angelo, he didn't actually sleep with her. He slept with Mariana. His act did not o'ertake his bad intent and must be buried, but as an intent that perished by the way. Thoughts are no subjects. Intents, but merely thoughts. Isabella doesn't seem to believe in hate crimes. Thoughts are not subject to the law. And in fact, her kneeling for mercy leads to the happy ending of the play, because the Duke then says, "Well, then how did this happen?" And the Provost says, "Well, I did save somebody's life who should have died." And he says, "Who is that man?" And he brings forward Claudio as like unto her brother. So she kneels down in mercy, and her brother does rise from the dead, but he doesn't take her hence in horror because, of course, he doesn't literally rise from the dead. He was never killed. But nevertheless, transcendence happens because she does ask for mercy beyond all sense, beyond all reason. And this is this sense of humanity being capable of morality that is beyond sense, beyond reason. That's another sense of transcendence. That is not the modern one. It is a part of who we are, a supernatural part of who we are, if you will. Now, the third example comes from a late play called The Winter's Tale. Now, that's sort of a Hellenistic romance. That's a style in which There's a work set in a vaguely Greekish pagan past, and the action centers on the return of a lost prince or a lost princess. In this play, it's a princess, and it restores order. In Shakespeare's time, there was a book, like a short story basically, that his play is based on, and he changes it around a little bit so that there is not just a return of the princess, but there is a return to life of another character, and it's a very unusual alteration. What happens in this play is it begins with two kings. There's Leontes, the king of Sicily, Polixenes, the king of Bohemia. They've been friends since childhood, and Polixenes has been visiting his friend Leontes for 9 months. And it just so happens that Leontes' wife, Hermione, is 9 months pregnant. Well, Leontes wants his buddy to stay around a little longer, and he asks him to do it, but he won't do it. He has to get back home. So he asks his wife, Hermione, hey, convince him to stay around a little longer. And she gives 3 short speeches, and at the end of them, Polixenes agrees to stay. And Leontes says to himself, hey, wait a minute, that was pretty easy. How did she do that in 3 speeches? I asked him to stay. We've been friends since childhood. He won't do it. She asked him to stay, 3 short speeches, and he will. And he begins to suspect they've been playing around together. And he becomes convinced that this was the case, and he goes off the deep end. He denounces his wife. He holds a public trial in which he accuses her of everything, denounces her. She gives birth, and he rejects the child as a bastard child. It's a daughter. He doesn't care. He orders the child to be exposed in the wilderness to die. And behind the scenes, before he does his public denunciation, he hires somebody to poison his friend Polixenes. The person who was hired reveals the plan, so Polixenes flees back to Bohemia, and there's tension between the kingdoms, and everything falls apart. He sends away to the oracle at Delphi to learn the truth. Some people come back from the oracle. The oracle is categorical about it. The wife was falsely accused. The friend was falsely accused. There's no truth to what the king says, and his kingdom will know no peace or ease until what was lost is recovered. What was lost meaning the lost daughter, because by now the daughter has been exposed, and it's believed that she's dead. But he doesn't even believe the oracle. It doesn't fall apart until his young son, in grief at the accusation of his mother and all of the things that happens, suffers a wasting sickness, and his young son dies. He is told that his wife died also, and now he thinks his son died, his wife died, his daughter has been exposed. Now he begins to believe, wait a minute, I went too far. I was wrong. And he regrets it, but it's too late. And so for 16 years, this is the state of things. At the end of this 16 years, his daughter, she was discovered by some shepherds, and they found her with a little symbol of royalty and some gold, and they take the gold and they use that to become fairly successful, and they raise the girl as their own daughter. And of course, the son of the king of Bohemia, Polixenes' son, sees her, falls in love with her. He thinks she's just a shepherd girl, but he wants to elope with her. And his father is like, you can't just marry a shepherd girl. You're the prince of Bohemia. You're going to be the king. You can't just marry a shepherd girl. He orders his son to leave her alone. Instead, the son flees with her to Sicily because he knows his father is at war, or is in enmity with the king of Sicily. So he thinks, I'll be safe in Sicily with this girl. Well, the girl, of course, is the daughter of Leontes. This all gets revealed. In fact, much of the central action of the play turns on this whole story and the eventual revelation of the daughter. But there is an additional revelation that has to take place, which is the revelation that the mother, Hermione, is also still alive. So the revelation takes place, everyone is reconciled, and then a woman of the court, Paulina, reveals that, I have a statue of the old queen that I've been keeping in my house. And the daughter wants to see it, the king wants to see it, everyone wants to see the statue. And so everything is pointing towards the revelation of the statue. So they come to it. They come to her house, and Leontes says, Paulina, we honor you with trouble, but we came to see the statue of our queen. Your gallery have we passed through, not without much content in many singularities, but we saw not that which my daughter came to look upon, the statue of her mother. Paulina says, as she lived peerless, so her dead likeness, I do well believe, excels whate'er yet you looked upon, or hand of man hath done. Therefore I keep it lonely, apart. But here it is. Prepare to see the life as lively mocked as e'er still sleep mocked death. Behold and say 'tis well. She draws a curtain and reveals Hermione, as it says in the stage directions, standing like a statue. And of course they're in awe because, as we know, it's her, but they think it's a statue. I like your silence. It the more shows off your wonder. But yet speak. First you, my liege, comes it not something near? And Leontes, her natural posture. Chide me, dear stone, that I may say indeed, thou art Hermione, or rather thou art she in thy not chiding, for she was as tender as infancy and grace. But yet, Paulina, Hermione was not so much wrinkled, nothing so aged as this seems. And Paulina says, well, so much the more our carver's excellence, which lets go by some 16 years and makes her as she lived now. So she's insisting that she's still holding to this idea that it's a statue, and the person who carved the statue wanted to make it look as if she were alive, now what she would have looked like. And Leontes sort of buys it, and he wants to touch her, as now she might have done, so much to my good comfort, as it is now piercing to my soul. Oh, thus she stood, even with such life of majesty, warm life, as now it coldly stands when first I wooed her. And then they want to touch the statue. The daughter wants to touch the statue, but Paulina makes them wait. So everything has been funneling towards the revelation that she's here, she's a statue, and they want to touch her. That's held off. And then Paulina says, wait, don't touch her yet. I have the power to make the statue move. It is required. You do awake your faith. Then all stand still, on. Those that think it is unlawful business I am about, let them depart. So unlawful magic to make a statue move. And then she says, music awake her. Strike, music plays. 'Tis time. Descend. Be stone no more. Approach. Strike all that look upon with marvel. Come, I'll fill your grave up. Stir, nay, come away. Bequeath to death your numbness. For from him, from death, dear life redeems you. You perceive she stirs. So this language of being redeemed, of coming away from death, it does make us mindful of other matters. And she moves, she comes down, and then listen to the language that Paulina continues. Start not, her actions shall be as holy as you hear my spell is lawful. Do not shun her until you see her die again, for then you kill her double. Nay, present your hand. When she was young, you wooed her. Now in age, is she become the suitor? And so now he touches her, and this is another moment that everything has gone towards. Another moment, a key action happens. Leontes touches her, and he says, oh, she's warm. And again, a moment that we've been building for, a moment where actor and actress come together. Everything sort of in the play hinges on it. And when you see it enacted, it's magic. Because it is the magic of, what are we seeing in this scene? Art coming to life. The power of art to bring something to life, to bring redemption, to allow a semblance of life in things, to make the passage of time go by, to redeem the passage of time, all of these things. And that's what we see in this moment. To redeem a mistake, but to redeem it in time when there's still time to be lived. All of that is what we can see here. A warm human touch, bringing all of that back. And again, this is a transcendent moment that is essentially different from the modern one of freedom from all boundaries. This is a transcendence of human connection, of the power of art and the power of redemption, in human life. What I think the works of Shakespeare can offer to us is a glimpse at another form of transcendence, another form of freedom than the one that we get in modern works of art. This is a kind of experience that you can have that isn't that modern experience, which is more hollow. And I would encourage people to go look at some versions of these plays, because you can see that moment enacted on stage. And it remains, I assure you, it remains quite magical to see. All right, I'll see you in the next episode.